Hi, I'm Brett Godfrey, and I'm a trial lawyer. I'm also a pilot. Most of you know me as a fiction writer, but let me tell you a little story about something that happened to me one night when I was in the middle of trying the largest class action of its type ever tried to a jury in the United States. After the first week of trial, the federal judge gave me a 3-day weekend so I could go home and rest up from the first week. So I got into my Cessna Golden Eagle. This is an exact replica of the airplane I was flying, and I took off for home. I flew first to Salt Lake City, and the weather was awful, but this airplane was good in known icing conditions. So I landed at Salt Lake, let my client out, took on some fuel, and blasted off again for Denver, thinking that I would be here home in Centennial, Colorado within 90 minutes. But I had to climb through a blizzard to level off where I could see the stars in nice, clear air. And once I reached that altitude, 23,000 feet, I was bringing my throttles back for cruise power setting. And as I did that, this engine right here failed on me. So I did everything I'd been trained to do. I shoved the throttles forward, the mixture forward, the propellers forward. I checked my fuel pump, pushed it up into high, my magnetos, my alternators, my fuel selector valve. Everything I could think to do, I did, and the engine didn't come back. So then I feathered it. What that means is I turned the blades of the left failed engine into the wind so that it would stop being a source of drag. And then I declared an emergency. I got a vector back first to Heber, Utah, which is a terrible place to land in a blizzard on one engine because the instrument approach has a ceiling much higher than the cloud deck was. So it wouldn't work for me. And I found myself arguing with the air traffic controller about where I was going to be sent. He then sent me to Provo, which has an instrument approach that goes all the way down to 200 feet. But it was a long ride back, sinking deeper and deeper into the blizzard, watching ice form on my wings, hitting my pressurized boots to blow that ice off about once a minute, trying to keep track of my navigation, trying to plan for an instrument approach that I hadn't been expecting, and maintaining enough airspeed to prevent the airplane from going into that fatal dive when your speed falls below 80 knots or so in this aircraft. Eventually, after what seemed like 100 years, I was established on the instrument approach into Provo to land on runway 13. And eventually I sunk low enough that I could actually see the runway 8 miles ahead. Everything was looking fine at that moment. I thought, I'm going to get through this. And then this engine failed. Now I'm what we call dead stick. So I called, I'd been on an emergency flight plan by that time. I called air traffic control and I said, Salt Lake Center, Golden Eagle 421, Charlie X-ray, right engine just went, we are now dead stick. And we were over Utah Reservoir. So this very grim voice came back to me and said, 1 Charlie X-ray, we have men and equipment rolling, which means they're sending emergency vehicles to where they think I'm going to crash. There's no way I can make it to the runway with no engines, and I'm 8 miles out. I'm not going to land on a runway. I didn't know at the time I was over Utah Reservoir and there was a 1-inch layer of ice. It would have been almost certain death if we had to touch down where I was planning to do so. When this engine failed, I left it windmilling. I didn't feather the propeller. I didn't secure the engine. It had fuel. It had electrical power. I just let it windmill. Turns out that's the smartest thing I've ever done in my life. If I had taken any other course of action, I'd be dead now, almost certainly. The engine came back just at 100 feet off the deck. It was the most gratifying sound in the world, this growl. And the airplane is yawing because the right engine is pulling. So I trim out that adverse yaw. I march along the last 5 miles to the runway. And when I was over the numbers at about 200 feet, because I'd climbed 100, that engine failed again. But I am now directly over the end of the runway. I am more worried than anything else about stalling, so I shoved the nose down to maintain that airspeed and then yank the stick back so I don't slam into the runway. And by sheer stroke of luck It was the smoothest landing I've ever had. I rolled out, and then I brought the throttles forward to taxi off the runway, and of course nothing happened. So I key the mic with a shaking hand, and I say, Salt Lake Center, Golden Eagle 421 Charlie X-ray, midfield, runway 13 Provo, unable to taxi, suggest you close the airport. And there was silence. When the squelch broke on my radio, I heard a strange whooping sound. I wasn't sure what it was. The voice came through and said, 421 Charlie X-ray, confirm you are on the runway at Provo? And I said, 1 Charlie X-rays, midfield, 13, unable to taxi, suggest you close the airport. That's all I knew to say. And by the way, I had a horrible taste in my mouth. It was pure adrenaline, pure fear, cotton mouth, but I was talking. I wasn't dead. So I wasn't judging myself too harshly. The guy comes back and says, good job, 1 Charlie X-ray. We have the airport manager en route. He'll be there in 20 minutes. He'll tow your plane clear of the runway, and he'll take you to a hotel. I couldn't believe I'd survived this. And then my cell phone rang. And I answered it trying to be Mr. Cool, trying to be James Bond. I go, Domino's Pizza? And my wife is on. She'd been watching me on FlightAware. She saw me lose airspeed, lose altitude, and then drop completely off the radar. She thought she was a widow. She didn't think the Domino's Pizza thing was all that funny. She says in a tearful voice, did you lose an engine? And I said, yeah, how'd you know? She says, well, I watched you drop off the radar on FlightAware. Well, that's the end of the story. I did win the trial. Read the book Black Sunrise if you have a thirst for adventure from someone who's been through adventure. I'm Brett Godfrey, and thank you for listening.